We shall learn today about some of the Zionist organizations supporting and enabling Israel in its crimes. The speakers come from IJAN, JNP, Greenwich Palestine Alliance, and one of the most active, committed human rights lawyers in the UK. Many Jews have been deeply disturbed and disgusted by the Gaza genocide and the starvation by the IOF. Some have chosen "not in my name" as their reaction. They deny any linkage to the crimes, but this is less than a political reaction. It stays on the personal level. This is not enough. To act politically, it is not enough to say that, or even to march with a poster with that wording. It is not enough to demand a ceasefire. Israel has never honored anything it has signed up to. Since the latest ceasefire started, more than 1,000 Palestinians were murdered in Gaza. What we need is a global political struggle against the source of all these crimes. The source is Zionism, a settler colonial project taking over Palestine and expelling its people. The ethnic cleansing, the starvation, the expulsions, the apartheid, the destruction and land theft, torture in prisons, the genocide, and the destruction of the whole of Gaza, the Hasbara lies, all are symptoms of political Zionism. One fights the disease, not its symptoms. Opposing Zionism, like opposing South African apartheid, is a task for all humanity. But Jews have a special place in this struggle, as Zionism is acting in their names, spreading anti-Semitism by claiming that all Jews support its crimes. We should support a global campaign against Zionism. We can call it Gaza, Global Anti-Zionist Alliance. People everywhere should join Gaza and act together against the militarized Zionist settler colonial state in Palestine. Acting against Zionist organizations in the UK is a crucial part of anti-Zionism. These organizations collect funds, invite Zionist speakers, spread Hasbara lies, impose the IHRA, police the NHS, send British Jews to fight in Gaza, help to inculcate Zionism in school and in teaching programs, press universities to fire academics and expel students, and put pressure on mainstream media, and intervene in our activities and pressure the Met into arresting protesters. Most importantly, they pressure politicians to legislate and act against Palestine and its supporters. They act as an arm of the British state on behalf of Israel. This cannot be allowed. The first speaker is Dr. Jonathan Flaxman, who is a medical doctor, a veteran of the struggle against apartheid, and a leading member of IJAN. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chaim. Thanks so much. I'm going to be speaking from some slides, so I'm just going to share the screen. Just bear with me. Thank you. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the Jewish Medical Association, which is one of the Zionist organizations here in Britain that is doing several of the things that Chaim has mentioned. And just a bit of history. The JMA was actually formed in 2007, bringing together a few Jewish medical groups, in particular the British chapter of the Israeli Medical Association and the London Jewish Medical Society. And it's worth actually just looking back at what this British chapters of the IMA are. They operate in 19 different countries. They're listed there on the slide. And basically what they are offshoots of the Israeli Medical Association. And they have a particular function. And that's to basically defend Israeli doctors and Israeli medicine, and I would add Israel. And this extract here, which is a screenshot from the IMA website, basically spells it out. They pressure international conferences to allow Israelis to participate. They provide what they call a public relations kit, in other words, talking points to combat what they call misinformation about Israel in medical journals. And they basically are, if you like, subcommittees of the IMA working abroad to defend and protect Israel and Israeli medicine. And they say there how they have frustrated calls to isolate the IMA from the WMA and other boycott campaigns. Now, one of the things that the JMA does is it interferes with and distorts the annual representative meeting of the British Medical Association. And I've just looked back at the last couple of years. The 2024 meeting, they issued a letter which said, as the Jewish Chronicle, that excellent publication, has put there, that doctors' conference is becoming a vehicle for Jew hatred. This is sheer propaganda coming out of the JMA, deliberately designed to create fear and anxiety amongst Jewish doctors and to paint this picture yet again of Jews being victims. And the letter also said Jewish doctors planning to attend can expect to encounter a mix of overt anti-Semitism, bullying, harassment, and flag-waving activism. This fills them with trepidation. They also complained bitterly about the number of resolutions put forward to the conference. And, this is a constant theme, and UKLFI are very good at this as well. We'll hear about them a bit later. They think nothing of writing to independent organizations, particularly trade unions and so on, to tell them what they can and cannot say and can and cannot debate at their conferences. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And they successfully interfered with this. This was the JMA, as well as UKLFI, also stuck their oar in the 2024 conference and convinced the BMA to actually seek legal advice about the conference motions. So they took this advice, and I've put a quote from the letter that the BMA sent out to the delegates just before. And they say that the advice they got, which they refused to share, by the way, so you couldn't challenge it, said that no individual motion was discriminatory, but when they're taken together, despite coming from different branches of the BMA, they risk being perceived as discriminatory, more specifically anti-Semitic. Now, you explain to me how if individual things are not anti-Semitic, when you put them all together, they become anti-Semitic. It just defies logic. So using that excuse and downgrading the motions, they actually ruled out 50 motions from the conference that were never debated. So there was a big uproar about that following that. And then we come to this year's annual representative meeting. And once more, we had another communication from the JMA saying how Jewish doctors feel intimidated and unsafe and excluded. And they had to ask for advice from the Community Security Trust to ensure the safety and to protect the well-being of Jewish representatives. All a load of bollocks, quite obviously. Completely made up so-called fears. We did much better this year because they daren't try and manipulate the agenda again. And we had 4 motions that were openly discussed and debated in a democratic fashion, and they were overwhelmingly passed by the delegates, 80% plus for each of the motions. And in terms of the safety issue, the only incident that happened at that conference was by a Zionist. I don't know if he was Jewish or not, but he walked past a small demonstration, pro-Palestine demonstration outside the hall, and actually said to the people outside, all Palestinians should be wiped off the face of the earth. Openly genocidal statement. That was the only incident that happened at the whole conference. There was no anti-Semitic statements or intimidation or bullying and all the nonsense that they fear-mongered about beforehand. But what has been happening across the NHS, since October 7, and in fact even before that, is a coordinated campaign to stamp down as much as possible on any expression of support for Palestine or the struggle for freedom in Palestine. And healthcare workers have become, since October 7, quite well organized in this country because we are totally outraged by the destruction of healthcare, the murder, detention, and torture of our colleagues in Gaza. And we've been very vocal about it, and people will have seen there's always been a big health block at the big national demonstrations. And because of that, and because health workers are naturally regarded quite highly by members of the public, they have a high level of trust in us, we become a particular target for the government and for these Zionist groups. So, dozens, probably hundreds of healthcare workers have been targeted for wearing Palestine symbols or colors and things. They've been harassed, bullied, intimidated. Many have had to take time off work. And hundreds of, if not thousands of hours of clinical time have been lost to the NHS, depriving patients of clinical services and lengthening waiting times. Now, the JMA has been actively involved in this repression within the NHS. This is an extract from their website, which they talk about a meeting they held on the 6th of December 24 with Wes Streeting, together with some of the other usual suspects, like the Board of Deputies, the CST, and so on. And what they demanded of Streeting was the IHRA, the single accepted authoritative definition, which they lied about and said has a legal basis. And they wanted to ban symbols, posters, signs, clothing, workplace meetings, and clinical meetings, and speech from the NHS, quoting the NH Constitution, which again was just made up nonsense. The NHS Constitution says nothing of the sort. 5 days later, Streeting makes a press release, and there's an extract or a screenshot of the Jewish News. Streeting calls for NHS chiefs to take action over anti-Semitic staff, and that's been a pattern throughout. Culminating in last month, in October, the government published plans in a press release, and the link is down here if you want to look it up, to so-called tackle anti-Semitism and other racism in the NHS. And on the right, I've set out the main elements of that plan. And it is to impose the IHRA definition across the NHS. It's to ban all symbols, colors, flags, badges, you name it, from the NHS staff wearing those. It elevates anti-Semitism above other forms of racism quite clearly. The press release is quite extraordinary, actually. It mentions anti-Semitism 28 times, Islamophobia twice, and no other form of racism even gets a look in. It imposes mandatory enhanced anti-Semitism training on all 1.5 million NHS workers, and links this to what's called the Core Skills Training Framework in the NHS, which is mandatory training for every single health worker. If you don't successfully complete that training, your career can be at risk, and even your job and your registration, your professional registration. And they're making this mandatory. So in essence, if you contest the fact that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic or that criticizing Zionism is anti-Semitic, you may not pass your training and put your job at risk. And the cherry on the cake is Lord John Mann, sorry, I left out the word man there, is to lead a review of the regulation of doctors in the workplace and by the GMC. And many people probably know of him. He's the so-called independent advisor on anti-Semitism, strong proponent of the IHRA, says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and actually said in 2017, anti-Semitism is the worst of racisms. So you can imagine how objective his intervention is going to be. And then just to finish off, we in Doctors in Unite, which is another group I'm a member of, wrote a comprehensive response to that government plan. And it's over here on the left, and there's a link there if you want to look it up, which basically analyzes the whole plan and points out how racist it is. And it's fundamentally racist because what this does is it completely erases any presence of Palestinians or the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And this is inherent to Zionism. As we know, anti-Palestinian racism is absolutely an essential part of Zionism. And in what the government are doing and what these Zionist groups in this country are doing is imposing a Zionist policy across the NHS. This is Zionism in the NHS. We've had some coverage from the British Medical Journal. On the right, there's a screenshot of that article by them. So I would appeal to you all. We're going to mount a campaign very shortly to fight back against this plan in the NHS. It's really important that we defeat it because if they succeed here, it will just embolden them to do this across the public sector, and we can ill afford that. This is a concerted attempt to completely ban any Palestinian solidarity from the entire NHS, and we cannot allow them to succeed. Thanks, I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for a concise and excellent presentation. I was recently a victim of this policy in the NHS when I received cancer treatment as a patient, and I was asked twice to remove my kefir, lest some Zionists might be deeply offended by it. So we all are experiencing this mad decision by the government. Our second speaker is Lubna Speitan, a Palestinian artist and activist from Greenwich, who has acted amazingly in the latest conference of the Green Party, and is part responsible for the results of support for Palestine. She's very active in other campaigns as well. For example, the campaign in the ports of Britain. Lubna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haim, for your generous introduction. I appreciate that. So, yeah, we've been, for the last 2 years or more, campaigning and challenging things from state repression to divestment from Israel, and, of course, the IHRA, JDA, and its alternatives. The big problem with those, of course, I mean, I won't need to elaborate. We've had extensive discussions, webinars on this subject, and what we're witnessing is the result of the weaponization of these definitions. I'm here sort of mostly to point out what organizations like Campaign Against Anti-Semitism have been doing to our doctors, our activists, fellow Palestinians, whilst we as Palestinians have had to sit and watch, not just for the last 2 years, but for decades, witnessing the erasure of our people, the periodic carpet bombing, and now it's the complete genocide, the attempted erasure of us and now of our rights, our very basic civil liberties, even to speak up against it. We're watching as comrades are imprisoned for taking action against this genocidal war machine, and then attempts to silence us on spurious grounds of anti-Semitism. This has been funded and financed, like as UKLFI was youth campaign against anti-Semitism by the state, and this expands with their Zionist control over policies and the legal system. And we're seeing as Jonathan explained, the enforced mandatory training of anti-Semitism rolled out along with the IHRA. And we've been campaigning against this extensively, trying to encourage people to understand that these are not attempts to protect Jews from discrimination against them being Jewish, but rather to protect a racist Zionist state from criticism as it continues to conduct its mass ethnic cleansing and erasure of our people and our rights. It's designed to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, silence us as Palestinians, as well as advocates of us and our anti-Zionist Jewish comrades who fight with us. The problem that they're creating is that when those that claim to be fighting anti-Semitism at the same time are repressing and censoring those who oppose genocide, what they more than likely do is end up creating resentment against Jews. And by associating those crackdowns on free speech and human rights abuses with Jewish interests, right-wing actors are creating the very sentiments that they claim to oppose. This is creating the problem. It is against Jewish people. We would stand there and oppose all forms of racism, and what we're encouraging people to do, rather than adopt these definitions which create both hierarchies of racism, superioritizes one group of people's rights over others, and conflates terms. Even the very terminology that they use is problematic. And we are resolving to address everything from the terminologies used, creating clear and concise terms. For example, anti-Jewish discrimination, anti-Muslim discrimination. And I myself am an advocate of doing away with all definitions. And what they do, like I've explained, is creating that hierarchy of racism. We advocate for a foundation of equality for all, which is implementing the Equality Act 2010 and other policies in place that challenge discrimination. And we want to do that on an equal footing to challenge all forms in equal measure. So this is what we are campaigning for, and we're asking all of those authorities and institutions to rescind and reject the IHRA, the JDA definitions, and any alternatives. Replace it with one model that will challenge all forms and protect all people's rights equally. Now we're seeing also again, it's part of the propaganda machine that they're using, which we are pushing back on, and we have to unite across, whether it's through the unions, through our workplaces, to push back, because as our comrades are being arrested and silenced across the movement, it's basically a fear campaign. They're trying to stoke the fear amongst people so they are prevented from speaking out. And it's almost like challenging even the divestment campaigns and accusing people of being anti-Semitic if they were to divest from Israel, which is a racist state, that is committing genocide. We are stating it, and we have a right to state it and call it what it is and to oppose it. And the sad fact of the matter is, as we're watching our people being erased, there's people being imprisoned and smeared and targeted for opposing, as we would have opposed. And my mother was in the Anti-Nazi League, and in the same way we opposed the Holocaust of the Jews, we must oppose the Holocaust of the Palestinian and indeed any other people. You cannot condemn one Holocaust and then condone another. This injustice has to be confronted, it has to be challenged, and people have to understand that unless we do this thing, we keep reiterating it, and that we keep pushing back across the movements, then we will find it hard to get to the next stage. Now, the reason why they're doing this is because they are afraid that they have now been exposed. The world is now aware and seeing there is a growing support for the pro-Palestine movement, and it is in the fear that people are realizing and awakening to this and pushing back against it, which is why they're clamping down now with more authoritarian measures. So I'm urging everyone to continue fighting that. We do have a resolution and a comprehensive annex that challenges this and gives a breakdown both historically and currently and politically, and the reasonings why we have to push back. So I would encourage everyone to support, and I'm glad that we're all here having this discussion, and I'm sure there will be those that will attempt to target us who are speaking out, but this is precisely what we're pushing back against and why we're here doing it. So thank you very much for your time on this platform.
Thank you, Lubna, for speaking powerfully and very movingly. I'm going to ask Sam Weinstein of IJAN, one of the leaders of this anti-Zionist movement, the most active part of the UK anti-Zionist movement, to speak now. Sam has led numerous, indeed more than 70 different actions against the Israeli ambassador, the Israeli embassy, the Foreign Office, Parliament, you name it, he's done it. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chaim. I should say last week was our 108th picket since the beginning of this particular phase of the genocide. We've been at the Israeli embassy most recently since we've been banned from anywhere near the home of the Israeli ambassador. And I want to say right at the outset that a lot of what I'm going to say is based on the excellent report which Cage International put out exposing UK lawyers for Israel and campaign against anti-Semitism. And I was added relatively late in the process to this, so I hope I don't step too much on Frank's toes. He's a very distinguished lawyer and I'm sure knows a lot more about the subject than I do, but I'm going to attempt to do give some basic summary and talk about it. First to say, organizations like the one being described on this webinar are considered Jewish very often and therefore above and beyond scrutiny and attack for being accused of anti-Semitism. Part of the purpose of this webinar is precisely to break that barrier and expose organizations like UKLFI to the normal scrutiny that any organization should face, to make it clear that any organization, whatever its characteristics, if it is covering for apartheid and genocide, then it is beyond the pale of civilized society and should be delegitimized in every way possible. From that point of view, I want to acknowledge the recent demonstration called by Jewish Anti-Zionist Action, JAZA, at a synagogue which was hosting the World Zionist Organization, speaking about Aliyah Day, the exaltation of Jewish people going to Israel, the exaltation of the cult of settler colonialism in Palestine. They were not intimidated by this abomination being held at a synagogue. And for those who were not there, while protesters were saying prayers for the Palestinian dead, the Zionist counter-protesters were screaming, IDF, 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 exalting the killers. But I'm here to speak about one of those organizations that has become a leading exponent of defending Israel's genocide and apartheid. UK Lawyers for Israel, UKLFI, was founded in 2010. In their own words, its objectives are to, quote, provide, assist in providing, procure, or promote the provision of legal support, including advocacy, research, advice, and campaigning in combating attempts to undermine, attack, and/or delegitimize Israel, Israeli organizations, Israelis, and/or support of Israel, and, quote, to create a supportive climate in the United Kingdom towards Israel. Whether Israel is a racist apartheid state committing genocide is irrelevant to them and their funders. UKLFI was set up after a conference on lawfare held in the illegal Israeli settlement on the West Bank. Lawfare in this context, for anyone who doesn't know, is the use of law as a weapon to undermine and silence any group or person supporting Palestinians and opposing the genocide. UKLFI's early activities included intervening to oppose a viola boycott campaign in Hackney Council in 2012, a campaign led by Yael Khan, an Israeli anti-Zionist Jewish woman who many of us know as having dedicated her life to the destruction of the Zionist entity. The boycott succeeded and UKLFI lost, I'm pleased to say. UKLFI is clearly integrated with the Israeli government. In 2012, they jointly hosted a two-day seminar alongside the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Israeli Embassy on lawfare strategies. In 2013, members of UKLFI were briefed by the Deputy Military Advocate General of the IDF and the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are just two examples. There are plenty more. Some of the personnel are interesting. UKLFI Director Daniel Burke has an association with the far-right Canadian news outlet Rebel News, which hired as a journalist Tommy Robinson, the well-known racist and fascist, who of course was invited to visit Israel recently. It's not just guilt by association. Burke has also represented Tommy Robinson and appeared on platforms with him. In 2016, UKLFI had the nerve to set up a charitable wing, UKLFI Charitable Trust, which carries out more educational activities. The charity holds, quote, educational events and seminars, while it claims that the, quote, talks we arrange are for educational purposes. However, it regularly hosts representatives from the IDF and supporters of a most right-wing version of Zionism. In some ways, it is even more dangerous than UKLFI, which is mainly reactive. The charity's education is a proactive attempt to spread Zionist propaganda, justifying settlement activity, denying the existence of Palestinians, of Palestine, and the rights of Palestinian people. They have hosted organizations such as Ragavim, which are advocating the settlement regime, including the demolition of Palestinian homes in the West Bank. Quote, Ragavim is dedicated to the preservation of Israeli land. Petitions courts to demolish homes and infrastructures in Palestinian communities. The NGO uses loopholes to ensure that only Palestinian structures are demolished and dismantled, leaving entire communities without proper roads, houses, or even water systems. We need to keep in mind that because this wing of UKLFI has charitable status, which means they claim some of our tax money, which means all of us, whether we like it or not, are contributing to this monstrosity. I'm pleased to say that Cage International, among others, has challenged their charitable status on the basis of their inherent racism, and the Charities Commission is considering the challenge. While not a lobbying group, UKLFI does regularly provide written evidence and has been invited as witnesses to provide oral evidence to parliamentary committees. Since 2016, it has almost single-handedly been responsible for overturning or nullifying BDS policy passed on dozens of campuses. There are also healthcare cases where they have gone after medical personnel to get them disqualified because they have had the nerve to testify about what they had seen while working to save lives in Gaza. The case of Dr. Ghassan Abu Sita is a prime example. I don't know if Frank or Jonathan want to comment more on that case. And perhaps the most outrageous thing that UKLFI has done is publish a report challenging international assessments that Gaza is experiencing famine. They have actually argued that the war and blockade in Gaza could potentially reduce obesity, which might in turn increase life expectancy. No doubt the Nazis had similar arguments while starving Jews, communists, Slavs, the disabled in concentration camps and Gaza and ghettos all over Europe. And just to add two things, how many of these we want to know how many of these how these organizations are funded. It is often very opaque. And two, IJAN, supported by Jewish Network for Palestine and Artists for Palestine, picketed UKLFI at 8 in the morning and got such a great response from the public that we completely ran out of hundreds of leaflets we brought. It's only a beginning. I think I will leave it at that. Thank you, Chaim.
Thank you, Sam, for a great presentation. And I would now ask Frank McGuinness to speak. Frank is one of the leading jurists who are appearing in British court, defending a whole number of activists from across the whole spectrum of Palestine, or action for Palestine rather than just Palestine action. We are very lucky to have Frank speak today because he is probably one of the most experienced in meeting the court's action against our support for Palestine. Please, Frank.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to share this space with all of you and to think about what we can do to confront these wretched Zionist organizations. I've been asked to speak about UK Lawyers for Israel. I'll try to keep it to about 10 or 12 minutes. As to their specific areas of action, as their name makes clear, with its reference to lawyers, their emphasis here is on legal activity. For a long time, UK Lawyers for Israel tended to prefer operating outside of the public gaze, but it seems that since the onset of the genocide, their strategy has pivoted somewhat towards an increase in media appearances, and that would seem to correspond to the profound crisis of image and reputation in which Zionism and the apartheid state of Israel now finds itself. The barrister Natasha Hausdorff has become their more well-known spokesperson, regularly appearing in the media, in debates, and before parliamentary select committees with mixed results. The range of influence of the organization can be deduced in part from its website, which lists its 8 directors. So they are Lady Hazel Cosgrove, the co-chair. She's a former judge in Scotland. Jonathan Lux, who's a co-chair and a former senior solicitor at a city law firm, Ince & Co. The barrister Jonathan Turner, who's the chief executive, he in 2011 co-founded UKLFI, quoting from their website, as a voluntary association to counter BDS and other anti-Israel activity using the law. Then there's Caroline Turner, who's a solicitor and before that an investigative journalist. There's Daniel Burke, who's a solicitor specializing in criminal and professional discipline law, and he was a recipient of the World Zionist Organization Herzl Award, and he served as the chair of the Zionist Central Council of Manchester. There's the barrister Brian Dr. KC. There's Paul Charney, who's a solicitor turned businessman and former chair of the Zionist Federation of UK and Ireland from 2012 to 2021. And then Naomi Levy, who was a family law solicitor at a West End law firm and later became a couples therapist. So beyond those are its directors. Its website also lists its 7 patrons, namely the Right Honourable Lord Dyson, Lady Cosgrove KC, the Baroness Deach KC, Professor Richard Suskind KC, the Lord Panic KC, Lord Grabiner KC, and Sir Ivan Lawrence KC. So I would say that from one point of view, that's an impressive roster, assuming that you find, senior administrators of the British Empire and its establishment impressive, right? It's a credentialed array of KCs, senior former judges. Lord Dyson used to sit on the UK Supreme Court, and it's clearly part of their strategy that they want to intimidate people. When people look them up, see their website, they see that they're backed seemingly by patrons and directors who form part of the British legal establishment. But a countervailing note, in September 2024, it was reported that Lord Carlisle, who's a prominent member of the House of Lords, had resigned as a patron of UKLFI, and this followed Lord Carlisle writing in the Independent. He had written an article to express his support for the Labour government's decision to partially suspend arms sales to Israel, and he described that as both courageous and legally correct. So I'm here to suggest that UKLFI are experiencing their own degree of internal disagreements that reflect the broader crisis of Zionism, and the way in which avowed Zionists are peeling off from these organizations because they're finding the political cost of continued association to be too great. As to UKLFI's methods, the main method we're talking about is filing complaints and writing relatively well-drafted letters, either explicitly or implicitly threatening legal action, both against individuals and against institutions. As I'm fond of pointing out, the organization's main tactic then is asking to speak to the manager. Like, that's their whole game. I should say that I think that tactic is somewhat running out of momentum, and we should capitalize on the fact that our enemies, our Zionist opponents, are in such a state of crisis. The main reason that tactic is sort of reaching a limit is because even though the British state is staunchly committed to its alliance with the apartheid state of Israel, the political cost of that alliance is becoming increasingly intolerable, even for staunch Zionists. Perhaps the best example of this is Wes Streeting, right? He came within 500 seats of losing his place in the House of Commons to a 24-year-old independent candidate, right? The British Palestinian Lian Mohammed. So that's what they're dealing with. They want to support the apartheid state of Israel. They're deeply committed as a matter of long-standing British state policy, stretching back at least until the Balfour Declaration of 1917 to this Zionist project of colonizing Palestine. But like with South Africa, under its apartheid regime, the political cost of doing so is becoming so toxic that that they're having to the regulators and the courts of the British state are having increasingly to make concessions to our anti-Zionist movement, because our movement is becoming too powerful for them to suppress. Unlike campaign against anti-Semitism, UKLFI seem a bit more disciplined and restrained and accurate when it comes to actually taking legal action. You will see some judgments and cases and stuff involving CAA that were quite poorly thought through. They often lose in court, whereas UKLFI seems to be more committed to sort of keeping their powder dry, and they tend to make threats, but they don't necessarily follow through on the threats. As to the targets, UKLFI's chosen targets are far too numerous to mention. They really are quite prolific. They seem to be quite a profound network of volunteer lawyers at the heart of UKLFI. And it's also the case that many of their targets won't have gone public on receiving such letters, on being dragged before regulators. Some people are embarrassed or ashamed, and so it can be difficult to assess the full scale of the damage for which they're responsible. A few examples then, and it's been mentioned already, but I'll reiterate that UKLFI is in some ways best known for their best work, should we say, was this hospital. This was reported pre-genocide, right? February 2023. This display of artwork by Palestinian children at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, which was removed after a complaint by UKLFI, which they said the display made Jewish patients feel vulnerable, harassed, and victimized. And I should say in passing that it's increasingly my view. I would encourage anyone who's going into court to confront these sorts of arguments or submitting complaint to regulators or employers. That's anti-Semitic, right? The suggestion that it makes Jewish people feel a certain way is anti-Semitic. It's homogenizing, suggesting that that Jewish people all have a certain view, that they're all attacked by the artistic expression of Palestinian children, right? That's grotesque. It's not just racist against Palestinians, it's also racist against Jews. And we should increasingly make that argument, right? That it's a form of anti-Semitic harassment to make such a generalized, homogenizing, and ultimately essentializing claim about Jewish people. They could have said that Zionist Jews find it harassing. No doubt they do, but that's a very different claim. Another example then of what they do is they target workers and professionals, right? They specifically single out people who've become prominent, who've said something more or less publicly criticizing the fascist ideology of Zionism and the apartheid state that it animates. So they will write, again, sometimes well-drafted, sometimes a bit sloppier complaints to regulators. Ghassan Abu Sitta was mentioned. He's a high-profile example of this. He wasn't just dragged in front of his regulator, but also through a range of different legal proceedings, because he is such an effective adversary of Zionism, because he has such unimpeachable credibility for having lived through a genocide. He tried to stitch up and show medical solidarity to his fellow Palestinians at a moment when they were being murdered en masse because of the way that Israel construes them as a racial threat. So he lived through literal war crimes, lived through the bombing of Palestinian hospitals, and he speaks publicly and unashamedly about his criticisms of the Zionist project that's colonizing his homeland. So he's a really formidable adversary of these Zionist groups, and predictably they have attacked him across a range of legal proceedings. They've attacked the charitable boards on which he sits. They've attacked his position at the university at which he teaches in Edinburgh, and they've also dragged him in front of his professional regulator, the GMC. So he's perhaps the most well-known example of someone who's facing GMC regulatory proceedings. There are many other such people. I should say in passing, I don't want to be self-involved, but individuals associated with UKLFI have repeatedly reported me to my regulator. That's the Bar Standards Board that regulates barristers, but they've never succeeded in having a single complaint against me actually upheld. And so it's my view, sort of to try and embolden people on this call. Like, they can look intimidating, but I really think UKLFI, their bark is worse than their bite. They're not that good at what they do. And in particular, since the genocide, the Zionist position that groups like UKLFI are explicitly occupying is just very difficult to defend in court. And that's in part because, for all its flaws, the courts of England and Wales afford a degree of rigor, right? Whenever a claim is made on social media or in a political context, people can sort of run away from accountability. They don't have to actually stand and defend the claim. In a courtroom, it's very difficult to make these outrageous claims without just being obliterated. And that's increasingly what I find tends to happen when these organizations and their so-called experts, their witnesses and so on, when they're forced to actually answer for their behavior, they often fall apart. So I really can't emphasize enough. I think they are a paper tiger. That's not to suggest that you underestimate them, but broadly, I think if you fight back against them, you're likely to win. And then on this tactic of trying to have events cancelled, which is another UKLFI favorite, a more hopeful example of how you can fight back. And this is an example that I was involved with. I was involved in co-founding a group called the Red Clinic, which is a communist psychoanalytic organization. And in March 2024, UKLFI targeted a sold-out event that the Red Clinic had helped to organize on psychoanalysis and Palestine, which was to be held at London's prestigious Freud Museum. And so UKLFI had tried, but they ultimately failed to stop that discussion from going ahead in what Novara Media described as, quote, an important moment for Palestine solidarity within a divided discipline, end quote. So what had happened was that UKLFI wrote to the museum, which is based at the former home of Sigmund Freud. They did this the day before the event was due to take place, and the event was intended, among other things, to draw attention to the genocide. One of the speakers at the event was Lara Shihai, co-author with her partner of the book Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, as well as the third speaker, who was Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, a well-known Palestinian feminist scholar who also holds Israeli citizenship. So I just want to quote briefly from my friend Lara Shihai, and I will come to an end as quickly as I can. But Lara said of that sorry incident as follows: anyone who expects me to dignify the specious Islamophobic and anti-Arab hate-mongering allegations made by a group of pro-Israel genocide vigilantes who are best known for forcing the removal of paintings by Gazan children in a hospital in the UK well before October 7th has chosen the wrong side of history. So the event went ahead, in my view, because we pushed back. I think UKLFI was used to encountering perhaps slightly timid liberals who get threatened by a well-drafted letter with some members of the House of Lords listed as patrons. And we just fought back. We made it clear to the Freud Museum, we applied equal and opposite pressure to the Freud Museum, and we made it clear that if they forced us to cancel the event, that we were going to take legal action against them, and that their institution's reputation was going to suffer. And I would say the anti-Zionist left within the museum's management also applied internal political pressure, insisting that the event needed to proceed. So as I've said, I think UKLFI, something of a paper tiger. Most of their arguments fall apart under mild scrutiny. I want to conclude. I'm conscious up in about 10 or 12 minutes already. I'll conclude very quickly with some thoughts on next steps and how to fight back. In my opinion, Israel has no right to exist and it should be dismantled. That's because Israel's official ideology is Zionism, and it's one of apartheid, racial segregation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. In my view, the violence in Palestine will continue for as long as Zionism remains undefeated. We should confront and defeat Zionism like we would aim to do with any other form of fascism. And it follows that we should question whether organizations like UK Lawyers for Israel should be allowed to continue existing. I mean, their whole raison d'etre is clear from their title. They exist to advance, they are for Israel. If I'm right that Israel should cease to exist, then UK Lawyers for Israel should also cease to exist. Individuals associated with that organization, with UKLFI, in my view, they need to be held publicly accountable. I think the Zionists are becoming pariahs, but we need to be proactive about ensuring that that's the case. So anyone listed on that website who's still openly supporting an apartheid state in that way should be held publicly accountable, obviously peacefully and within the four corners of the law, but we should find ways to hold them accountable for their open support for this fascist ideology. Hopeful development in August this year, European Legal Support Centre and the Public Interest Law Centre submitted a formal complaint. More of that, I think, that needs to be encouraged. They sent a complaint to the Solicitors Regulation Authority against UKLFI Director Caroline Turner, who I mentioned previously. They're alleging that she's breached her professional duties as a solicitor, and the complaint further alleges that the group uses so-called SLAPs, right, strategic lawsuits against public participation. And they further allege that UKLFI effectively operates as an unregulated law firm and that it should be brought under SRA regulation. So to conclude, in my view, we should be making an argument in court that explicitly attacks the Zionist beliefs held by UKLFI and its patrons, its directors. We should do that both when defending ourselves against UKLFI, but also in a more offensive way in legal and political campaigns like that one launched by PILK and ELSC. In my view, people who are negatively affected by the actions of UKLFI and other Zionist groups should get better at suing them. We should be more willing to simply take legal action against them and sue them for damages. It's long past time for us to go on the offensive against this grotesque ideology. It is trite, but no less true to say, and I genuinely think in my experience of practicing at the bar almost a decade now, the best defense is almost always a good offense. Even when you're being prosecuted, dragged in front of your regulator, fired from your workplace, go on the offensive. That's the best way to win. So I'll wrap up my contribution by saying that, on October 7th, various Palestinian armed groups and individuals militarily confronted and humiliated the armed forces of the apartheid state of Israel. And after that humiliation, the genocidal Zionist response has provoked a profound crisis within the entire project of Zionism. People in a wide range of contexts are increasingly willing to interrogate the racist and even fascist character of Zionism. And so it's experiencing, Zionism as an ideology is experiencing a moment when, suffering the blows of the critique directed at it, it has lost its ability to veil and conceal the social relations from which it emanated. Those social relations are colonial, but more than that, because Zionism views Palestinians as a racial threat to the demographic purity of the Jewish ethno-state that it exists to create and maintain, Zionist social relations are also genocidal. And so, in my view, when we present uncontroversial facts about Zionist ideology and history in a court, in a tribunal, it sort of crumbles under scrutiny, like sunlight, the best disinfectant and all that. And I think in particular, I want to suggest that we should be making arguments about Article 17 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So to put that in plain language that non-lawyers, non-qualified lawyers will understand, we should be, there's this well-known case of Granger, which talks about philosophical beliefs. We should be arguing that Zionism is not worthy of respect in a democratic society. And from there, it follows that UK Lawyers for Israel, as an avowedly Zionist organization, is itself unworthy of respect and should be systematically dismantled. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Frank, for an amazing presentation, but more to the point, for all the work that you're doing in the British courts to fight the different actions against our coming together to support Palestine and against the Zionist state. Our next speaker is Dr. Les Levidow, who is one of the leading anti-Zionist activists in this country, who started working in BRICUP and in in JNP and in other organizations. He has spoken and published on these topics for many decades, and he's working at the Open University. Les, the floor is yours. Please keep the time slot because we are a bit late.
Okay, thanks to the previous speakers. I want to speak about why Zionist organizations appear to be so powerful. We have heard in some detail about how they have protected Israel's genocide in various ways, by justifying it as self-defense or by persecuting opponents. I will continue with a question, or perhaps a riddle. In Britain, what is the most powerful Zionist institution? My answer is the British state. Powerful, obviously, but why Zionist? Because it has had a deep commitment to the Zionist settler colonial project since at least the 1917 Balfour Declaration. And why such a commitment? Around that time, the first military governor of Jerusalem wrote in his diary that a future Jewish state would be, quote, a little loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of hostile pan-Arabism. He drew an analogy with the loyalist perversion of the Protestant religion, using racist stereotypes of Catholics to promote Protestant supremacy, dependent on British imperial rule and assistance. A future Jewish state, likewise, would depend on support from the British state. So it would defend imperial interests against Arab national sovereignty and self-determination. His future scenario turned out to be perversely prophetic. But why do so few Palestine supporters call the British state a Zionist institution? As a trivial reason, it is so much more than that, not a main reason why it exists. But there is a more subtle reason, namely, the Palestine movement has had a long time ambivalence or confusion about how the British state relates to Jewish-led Zionist organizations. I mean, how can we explain the state's pro-Israel policy, especially its recent total support for Israel's genocide? On the surface, it may appear to result from an extraordinary power of the Zionist lobby, or Israel itself, or both together. Such a perspective imagines that Britain has been pushed to act against its will, even, quote, against the national interest, through a policy that brings Britain no apparent benefit, some say. Many Palestine supporters imagine that an alien force has deceived or intimidated British politicians into supporting Israel. Such images invert the real power relation, which lies within a UK-Israel partnership, as I argue here. For the Zionist organizations which are the focus of this webinar, their powerful role depends partly on support or complicity from the British state. Here I give 5 examples. First, funding. The Community Security Trust, CST, receives funds from the Home Office, especially a multi-year budget, through the Jewish Community Protective Security Grant to protect Jewish communities from hate crimes, terrorism, and anti-Semitism. After the Manchester synagogue attack, it received an extra pledge of £10 million to scale up security. This indirectly helps to fund its regular reports on anti-Semitic hate speech these sometimes have conflated anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist speech acts. As in one annual report that named two people in particular, namely the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek and me, a badge of honor. Second example, interfaith events. These bring together representatives of Jewish, Zionist, Muslim, and Christian groups, often with sponsorship from state programs. As a crucial role, such events suppress or deter any reference to Israel's colonization or racism. So they depoliticize the conflict and perhaps trivialize it as violence from both sides. Some Muslim groups have participated, thus colluding in self-censorship over these issues. Why? Because they face Home Office pressure through various carrots and sticks. On the one hand, collusion is rewarded by carrots, such as appointments to prestigious consultative roles. On the other hand, refusal incurs sticks, such as being accused of anti-Semitism, extremism, or both, thus marginalizing such groups. Third example, defining anti-Semitism. As previous speakers have explained, Zionist organizations have aggressively promoted and deployed the IHRA definition to stigmatize pro-Palestine views as anti-Semitic. As the extra relevance here, since 2005, they made great efforts to gain state endorsement for this racist document. After they finally succeeded in 2016, their false allegations could more effectively deter pro-Palestine speech and press institutions to do likewise, especially local authorities and universities. Fourth example, demonizing pro-Palestine protests. The state demonizes such protests through racist tropes and scaremongering, which are developed with Zionist organizations. They, in turn, discipline fellow Jews through ostracism. At the Big Saturday protests, the prominent Jewish bloc represents only a small fraction of Jews in attendance. For many reasons, perhaps some good reasons, they march under other banners. However, as an ominous reason, many Jews fear being photographed in the Jewish bloc, since such association could attract criticism from relatives or friends. Fifth example, police persecution. Since Israel's genocide provoked larger and more widespread protests, Zionist spotters have regularly informed police that specific protesters are acting illegally. For example, that a slogan is anti-Semitic or pro-terrorist. Police duly arrest the targeted person, often then imposing bail conditions, which is often the main purpose of the arrest. Such practices give Zionist individuals an indirect repressive power over Palestine protesters. Why this widespread pattern? Because Zionist commitments are deeply embedded in British institutions, especially the police. They conflate Jews with Israel, and police chiefs seek to please their political masters in Whitehall. These 5 examples illustrate how the apparent power of Zionist organizations has depended partly on the British state. Conversely, it needs them as a moral alibi or shield to pretend that its racist policies protect the Jewish community, of course, a racist stereotype. The Jewish shield helps the state to suppress Palestine protests and to deflect criticism of its own racist role. Now, we try to discredit these organizations for playing those roles, but why do they play this role? Their ideology is Jewish supremacist. This comes from and perpetuates a state philosemitism, stereotyping Jews as loyal citizens who identify with the Zionist settler colonial project and thus serve the imperial order. Historically, this is how the ruling elite eventually accepted at least some Jews as white, abandoning earlier negative stereotypes of Jews. Jewish supremacism draws an analogy with white supremacist ideologies of European settler colonial projects that spread barbaric practices around the world. Zionism imitated their racist dehumanization of indigenous people as a basis for robbing, dispossessing, and massacring them. Conversely, Zionism has an intuitive appeal to the colonial legacy of Western elites. This appeal has been intensified by demonizing the Palestinian resistance as terrorist or anti-Semitic, and likewise demonizing Palestine supporters abroad, that is, in this country. Within the Palestine movement, however, some people use the term Jewish supremacist in an essentialist way. They attribute the Zionist settler colonial project and its political power to special powers or characteristics of wealthy Jews, which is a racist stereotype. This explanation separates their role from the wider pattern of Western settler colonial regimes. It implies that Zionist organizations are the main driver of Western support for Israel. This inverts the political reality. Our anti-racist perspective locates the problem rather in a state-Zionist partnership. When we target Zionist organizations, let's highlight their role in that racist partnership. As previous speakers have said, let's always fight back and go on the offensive. So I conclude there.
Thank you very, very much, Les, for summing up many of the arguments the other four speakers have advanced. And I would now open the floor for questions. We have 20 minutes or 22 minutes before 8. I aim to close the meeting at about 8 o'clock. I think you might want to take into account that Lubna has to leave in something like 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have any question to Lubna, I will take those first. But I would ask all of you who want to raise a question to raise your electronic hand, and then I will allow you to ask your question. And I ask you to be very brief so that others could also speak. Let us have indications from anyone who has a question to ask, please.
Hi. My question is quite simple, really. It's towards, I think, Frank. What possible advice would you give to leading activists that have been targeted, particularly where their employers have been contacted, and that then takes them down the route of not only their careers being jeopardized, but also the risk of them losing their livelihoods? Thank you.
Frank, would you like to relate to that topic?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question, and there is a crisis of free speech in Britain. It was already bad before October 2023, and it got a lot worse, right? A lot of people did get fired. A lot of my clients have been fired or they've been suspended. I would say a few things. I think, first of all, it's very difficult to see things clearly when you're the one being attacked. And I know that from occasions when I've been attacked, and I know that from helping comrades who are being attacked. And so the first thing is to say that we win when we collectivize the struggle. So report it to the European Legal Support Centre using their online tool. Speak to your trade union. If you're not already a member of a trade union, then join one. And if you are, then speak to your trade union. And I usually suggest that people get a sort of team of trusted people around them, and even just create a WhatsApp or a Signal group with 4 or 5, maybe 6 people. You can put a trade unionist in there. If you know someone, you can put a lawyer in there. You can put a trusted friend or a family member in there. And what that will do is it will give you space to make certain decisions about how best to respond to the crisis or the problem as it unfolds. And that will avoid you making stupid decisions and making mistakes under pressure. You can just sanity check things. If you're thinking about saying something publicly about it, you can make sure that the wording of anything that you say is checked by some people who have your best interests at heart. So that's what I usually try to do with my clients, and it's certainly what I've done whenever I personally have faced those kinds of attacks. And then the other thing is, like I said, I think the case of David Miller against Bristol is very helpful in this regard. If you're being dragged in front of your employer, you can argue that you're manifesting your anti-Zionist philosophical beliefs. And so I think asserting that at quite an early stage, whether in a grievance or in response to a disciplinary, simply saying, well, I'm an anti-Zionist, that's a deeply held philosophical conviction, that will make things much more difficult for your employer, because they then have to contend with the impending argument that you're going to say that you have a right to manifest your belief, you have a right to freedom of expression, and that they're not to disproportionately interfere with that right. So raising the question of anti-Zionism, making that explicit, putting it in writing. And then, like I said, I think in my experience, the best defense is a good offense. And I've written an article, I've not yet published it, but I'm hoping to publish it soon. And the title is Zionism is not worthy of respect. And I explained, I think, in my talk that phrase, not worthy of respect in a democratic society, comes to us from Article 17 of the European Convention, as interpreted in the case of Granger. So basically what's being said there is that for a philosophical belief to attract the protection of the Equality Act and the European Convention, it has to be, it can't be akin to fascism, right? You can't use the European Convention to attack other people's rights. And so when you're facing a criticism from your employer, or someone else is attacking you on the basis that you've expressed anti-Zionist views, instead of trying to defend those views, the best thing is to go on the offensive and start attacking Zionism and just say very, very dispassionately, without any kind of emotion, because that's the style that the British courts and the British employers tend to prefer. You just say, well, as a matter of fact, it's the official ideology of an apartheid state. It's a genocidal ideology. It's engaged in racial segregation. It's engaged in the illegal occupation of Palestinian lands for more than 50 years. The Israeli state is currently governed by fascists. You could quote The Guardian, right? The Guardian has an article confirming that Bezalel Smotrich is a fascist. And in that way, you just say, this ideology is fascist. It's not worthy of respect. How dare you criticize me for being anti-fascist? And it just completely flips the script and it puts them on the back foot. They're having to explain why they are suppressing someone just for criticizing a fascist ideology. That's my advice. Go on the offensive.
Thanks for your excellent advice, Frank. Is there anyone on the panel that wants to relate to this, or shall we go to the next question?
Right. I don't mind adding something here, Chaim, if I may.
Do.
So I know trade unions were mentioned, and we have got, like I explained earlier, an annex with a resolution that we have actually passed at several union branches to reject and rescind the IHRA, JDA, and any alternatives. So we're happy to share that with you if you are in a union, to have that pass and get that support behind you. UCU also considering this. So we're working quite broadly with a lot of groups and people and trying to push back again with these resolutions in place and rally more support around them. So if anyone does want me to provide you with that, and the annex outlines various grounds on which we're challenging and opposing it and what we resolve to do as an alternative. So you're welcome to email us at greenwich-palestine-alliance@protonmail.com. We're happy to send that to you and support you and organise a panel to come and speak to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lubna. It's quite clear that we need to collect such advice and put it on a number of leading websites so people can actually look at it in their own time. The next question comes from Crystal Amos. Crystal, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, there are two questions I had. One was for Jonathan, and that is there a legal challenge to the government's mandatory training, the thing that Wes Streeting is trying to bring in? So I wondered whether there was a legal challenge against that. And the other question for Frank is there any mileage in using or putting evidence of the UK's complicity to the International Court of Justice? I know they haven't yet ruled on the genocide, but is it something we should be preparing? Because there seems to be, given the number of activists, the number of us that have been targeted by the state, by the British state, not just in this country but elsewhere. So those two questions.
It's a great question. I'm not actually familiar with ICJ proceedings. I'm familiar with the outcome of those proceedings, having read, followed the South Africa genocide case closely, followed the various advisory opinions and read them closely. So I do rely on them in domestic proceedings, but I've not appeared in front of the ICJ. So I'm less well placed to specifically address how we can confront Britain in international jurisdictions. But I would say that increasingly it's possible to confront them in domestic jurisdictions. And I've been doing that in a lot of, for example, regulatory cases, right? So the way you do that in regulatory cases, and again, British courts prefer dispassionate statement of fact. So all I've been doing is going into court and saying, Judge or Your Honor or whoever it might be, I have some concerns because there's an elephant in the room here. And it's that the British state stands accused of more than a century of support for Zionism and of actively participating in this genocide. And then you just state some facts and you can quote some articles. Matt Kennard's reporting has been very good on this stuff. You can report from the High Court judgment in the arms sales judicial review. It says it's not in dispute that the British state is currently selling arms to an apartheid state while it commits genocide. And you just say all this very dispassionately to the judge. You point out that International Center for Justice for Palestinians has accused Keir Starmer of committing war crimes on camera in that LBC interview. And you just say all of this in court. You just say, you can see, Judge, why I might have concerns that the British state is not neutral. It has chosen to side with the apartheid state of Israel while it commits a genocide. And I'm sure that you personally, my Lord, Judge, Your Honor, whoever, I'm sure that you will remain neutral, but I have concerns that there may be a certain bias within the British judiciary towards Zionist ideas. And then from there, you can go on to mount the kind of attack against Zionism that I was describing in my previous answer, right? Simply say a bunch of obvious facts about Zionism. And what you're doing by that is you're completely reformulating. And again, you're going on the offensive. You're doing it in quite a calm way, but you're basically saying, look, no one really cares what you think, the British state, because you're committed to this. You're committed to colonialism. You're committed to the racist mass murder of Palestinians because you think they're the wrong race. That's not so much the fault of Israel as it's the fault of the British empire that created the Zionist entity in the first place. You can absolutely find ways to go into court and say that, to name the phenomenon that you raised in your question, namely the phenomenon of British state, not just complicity, but participation, I would say, in the genocide and in the Zionist colonization of Palestine. I think that's part of the winning strategy. Just like with respect and with humility, just saying like, well, hold on a second. The British state's up to its neck in Palestinian blood. Like, you're not neutral in this. You are complicit. Like, I think it's really important to go into court and to make that very point.
Thanks, Frank. Is there anyone wants to add to this before we go to Shahida Blakey?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for the question. Not specifically on the mandatory training element. I do know there is one health solidarity group that has engaged some human rights and employment lawyers to challenge IHRA and to look at the other elements of this dastardly government plan that they're going to impose on the NHS. I think it's highly problematic, the whole thing, and we can challenge it on a number of fronts. The training is an important one, and I think is going to be one of the aspects that a lot of healthcare workers are going to get very concerned about, even those who are perhaps not so politically involved or aware about Palestine. So yes, the other thing is the lack of consultation, which I mentioned briefly in my talk. There's a statutory duty for them to consult on all these changes. They've barely mentioned. I think they talked about they will engage stakeholders. That wonderful woolly phrase when an authority just wants to ram something through, they say things like that. So it's certainly in our thinking, and we are in contact with lots of different health groups and others. And we're going to be putting on a whole campaign about it. So watch this space. Thanks.
Shahida Blakey to speak.
Thank you so much for organizing this, and to all the speakers. My question is, and forgive me if it's naive to ask this question, is are there similar organization to these UK lawyers, Lawyers for Israel, as there is for Palestinians, that is doing exactly what they're doing? So we're on the offensive, and we've got a network of these lawyers, like Frank and a group of others that obviously are standing up to what's going on currently. And adding on to Sadia's is that I'm part of one of their organization that faced these pushback because we platformed David Miller And the information that I've learned today would have been so helpful. We didn't have that, and obviously we still stood up and still pushed back and carried on with our event. Thanks to a couple of other organizations that supported us. But whatever's been said today, is it recorded as well that we can sort of go back to as reference?
Yes, it is recorded and will be on our website.
Thank you. So my question is to anyone really, Lubna, Frank.
Yes, there is actually one that we work with. I'm trying to find the link. I'll try and get that passed over to you. But I think it's something Lawyers for Peace. Sorry, forgive me. It's been a long day and I'm about to jump onto another meeting. But yes, and of course, Riverway, they give a lot of training. That would be Frank's bit to say there. Yes, there are certainly mostly us as campaign groups. We're taking a lot of that action, and the legal teams that we are working with, and the healthcare workers. It's like a collaboration, and also using the union as well, as platforms. So yeah, we're happy to collaborate and organize, and also outsource and put you in touch with others. But this would definitely be, I think, one Frank can elaborate on. We do need a specific UK Lawyers for Palestine. I think that would be a good one to set up. So I'm with you on that. Yeah. Happy to join it if it is. Thank you.
Frank, would you like to say a few words about this?
Sure. And I see that Les also would like to come back on it. I would just say, I think there is a growing network of anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian, qualified lawyers, activists. The European Legal Support Centre does vital work documenting the scale of the problem. Their capacity is limited, but they have they are occasionally able, if a case is strategic, they're able to wrap their arms around a case and represent people who are facing repression because of their pro-Palestinian advocacy. Public Interest Law Centre are also brilliant. I do a lot of work with them. They have They have 20-something lawyers, and there are a few other law firms that I can mention. Bernberg Pierce does a lot of criminal defense work. There are other law firms that do criminal defense work. And then, as Lubna mentioned, I think the trade union movement is important. There are some unions that are very militant in this space, others that are, passable. And within any union, there will be individual members who are good at confronting Zionism, defending their members who've been attacked for confronting Zionism. So I think the union movement's an important part of the picture. But what I would say is that we do have a problem, which is a capacity problem. It's, as I've said, there is a crisis of people being fired from their jobs, dragged in front of regulators, criminally prosecuted, like you name it. People are being systematically suppressed in this country when they criticize Zionism and when they criticize the apartheid state of Israel. And so part of our problem as a movement is increasing our capacity. I'm wary about placing too much emphasis on qualified lawyers. I think that our movement gets stronger and better whenever we learn how to defend ourselves without relying on lawyers. I think that what lawyers we have should be embedded within the movement and accountable to it. But ultimately, I think we learn by doing. We learn from our victories. We learn from our defeats, and we are in the process of deepening our understanding and of increasing our capacity to fight back against these attacks.
Thank you very much. I would allow the two panelists that want to come in to speak now. Could you start, Les?
Yes, there was a question about a legal challenge to the health secretary trying to force the NHS to impose the arbitrary definition. And certainly there's a need for such a challenge, but that really depends on our lawyer friends to figure out how to do that. But as the bigger picture, any kind of legal challenge depends for its success on mass resistance. It does make a difference in pushing the courts one way rather than the other. Now, if we look back to local authorities, in 2017, Labour Party headquarters ordered all Labour councils to adopt the arbitrary definition. And as far as I know, they all did eventually. And this certainly had a chilling effect. Don't know to what extent they then persecuted individuals. There was a lot of pushback, even from within, well, the Labour Party and more widely, against applying that definition, at least in the borough where I lived, and the council held back, as far as we can see, from persecuting individuals. I don't know about the rest of the country. In this case, it's much more provocative. The proposal is that all NHS staff must sign a statement, that or something even worse than that. So that's even worse in one sense, but it's an opportunity for mass resistance. So I just want to pose the question, partly for Jonathan, on what would be the basis for a united resistance, overt resistance and perhaps implicit resistance against signing a statement of loyalty to this Zionist document.
Jonathan, would you like to react?
Yeah, I think you mean the NHS, yes, the latest assault on the NHS. How are we going to
Yes.
coalesce a campaign around that?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, we're working on a petition, but as well as thinking of things like asking people to, as Frank has already mentioned, contact their unions, because a collective response is absolutely crucial. We can't keep fighting and defending individuals. They'll pick us off one by one, and we'll lose eventually. We have to come together and fight it collectively. So for the unions to take it up, we want patients, members of the public, to get involved as well. The NHS takes complaints very seriously. So we're going to put forward or put together a kind of template letter for you to write to the PALS, which is the Patient Advice and Liaison Service, to make a formal complaint, and to the CEO. I do not want my trust to adopt the IHRA, stop victimizing and targeting our health workers, protest outside, support the local campaigns, fundraisers that are going on. So that all needs to be brought together. And we're near the point of going public with it, but we're still having some kind of internal discussions to agree the sort of final strategy. But it's in the pipeline, definitely.
Thanks a lot. This sounds really excellent. I'm sure, like me, many others are learning quite a lot from those reactions. And I think, Sam, you must be the last one to speak, I think.
Thank you, Chaim. I wanted to say, not only is Zionism, because I think this is really important to all of our discussion, not only is Zionism responsible for this genocide, but it is also the greatest purveyor of anti-Semitism in the world at this time. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And I also want to point out, the question was about repression, and IJAN, with other groups, and I think Frank is part of it too, has been pulling together an anti-repression coalition, which we are calling Right to Reject Zionism. And it's an international initiative, which I hope other groups will also join. I wanted to say one other thing as well. Well, a couple of things. We put out a pamphlet some years ago, which I think is really important to keep in mind. It was called Israel's Worldwide Role in Repression. And in practical terms, when you look at it, Israel has been involved in every repressive regime internationally and continues to perform that function. And it is critical to see Zionism and Israel as part of that. It uses the way it is murdering Palestinians as a way of selling armaments and all kinds of other tools of repression. The last thing I want to say is one of the things that got this webinar going was our interest in the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is another Zionist organization, which unfortunately we haven't had anybody talking about on this webinar. But I think it's really important to see them as for the last, I think they claim that they've been around for the last 100 years, as being a reactionary force for the last 100 years. And their most recent thing is they proudly put on X that they had met with reform. And it gives you some idea of where they are. And we are looking certainly at joining with others to take them on as an institution and to take them on in the street. And last but not least, to say, I said earlier that we have been protesting for the last 108 weeks, and we do it every Friday between 6 and 7, and we invite everybody to come to our picket this coming Friday at the Israeli Embassy on Kensington High Street between the hours of 6 and 7. We want to shut the embassy down and break all diplomatic relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope that we will see many of the people here on the list of participants in our activities. I just wanted to correct something that you said, Sam. The Board of Deputies in 1916, when the Balfour Declaration was under discussion and then shared with the public, the Board of Deputies was against it. It was anti-Zionist. And they said that this declaration is a terrible thing to do because it will bring about anti-Semites saying to Jews, go to Palestine, what are you doing in Britain? And the person that represented it was Lord Montagu from the Board of Jewish Deputies. So what we have seen is Zionism not only colonizing Palestine, but colonizing Jewish organizations and Jewish individuals into serving its terrible crimes. I
accept the correction.
I would thank all 5 of you for being not just analytical, but very practical. And this recording that will be on the website in a day or two will be an important tool for people in the future. We will try our best to improve the advice from time to time by putting other topics there as well. Thank you very much for everyone who partook, who spoke, who asked a question, joined our activities against the criminal organizations who support Israel in Palestine, in the genocide. They support the expulsion. They support the starvation. This cannot continue. Thank you very much.